The pack sold her away, until the Alpha King claimed what was his. Snow fell in thick, cold sheets, coating the ground in a blanket of white that seemed to stretch endlessly. In the distance, a fortress carved from black stone loomed, jagged towers cutting the sky. Inside its walls, the world felt darker, heavier, as though the weight of power itself pressed down on every stone. Lyra shivered, not from the cold alone. Her hands were bound with coarse ropes, and her stomach knotted with fear and anger. She was no stranger to hardship. She had been raised among her pack, small but proud, in the shadow of larger, stronger clans. Yet no preparation could have readied her for this. Betrayed by her own blood, sold to strangers who saw her not as a person, but as a prize, she felt the sting of humiliation cut deeper than the icy wind ever could. The auction hall smelled of smoke, sweat, and metal. Torches burned along the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced across the faces of the bidders. Some were human, their eyes sharp and greedy. Others were supernatural, their forms shifting and strange in ways that made Lyra's heart pound. Among them she noticed the strongest presence in the room, a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a black cloak, face hidden beneath a mask. He did not speak, did not smile, yet somehow every breath she drew seemed to respond to his presence. Her father had sold her. The thought burned hotter than any winter fire. He had hesitated only briefly before the coins clinked in his palm, trading his daughter for wealth and protection from rival packs. Lyra's heart ached with betrayal. She had once believed that family meant safety, but now, standing here bound and exposed, she realized that blood could be as sharp as a blade. The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice like gravel, raised his hand. "Next," he said, and the hall quieted, a silence thick enough to choke on. Lyra's eyes darted to the crowd. She tried to steady her breathing to hide the trembling of her hands and legs. Pride, she reminded herself. Pride is not given. Pride is taken even when the world tries to crush it. Lyra of the Winter Fang Pack, the auctioneer called. Born to loyalty, sold to fortune. Who will bid for her? Hands shot up, coins clinking against gold plates, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Lyra's stomach sank as each bid passed, higher and higher, her life measured in numbers she had never asked to be counted. She wanted to scream, to tell them she was more than a price, more than property, but the ropes around her wrists, the weight of the hall, and the piercing gaze of the masked man held her silent. Then a hush fell. The masked figure stepped forward, his cloak brushing the floor like midnight smoke. His voice was calm, yet it carried a power that cut through the room like a blade. "She is mine." The words were simple, almost casual, but they made Lyra's heart stumble. Whose voice had the strength to silence hundreds of voices, to stop the bidding in its tracks. The masked man had not raised a hand, had not brandished a weapon. And yet every eye in the hall turned to him, waiting, afraid to breathe. The auctioneer hesitated. "Sir, she is mine," the man repeated. His tone left no room for argument. "All the gold, all the bids, none of it matters. She belongs to me." Lyra's chest tightened. Belongs to him. She barely knew the man, and yet the air around him made her feel as if he had already entered her thoughts, her dreams, and perhaps even her soul. She wanted to pull back, to fight, to run, but the ropes held her fast. And somehow in that binding she sensed a strange certainty. She was standing before someone who would not be denied, someone who could claim her with a single word, yet whose eyes hinted at something more. He stepped closer, and the crowd parted as if the air itself feared him. Lyra saw a flash of pale skin beneath the mask, and the light caught in eyes as gray and sharp as a storm-tossed sea. There was no warmth in them, not yet, but there was depth, like a winter lake that hid secrets in its freezing depths. "Do you understand?" he asked, voice low, almost gentle. "I said she is mine." The auctioneer stammered, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. "Of course, my lord, of course." Lyra felt her stomach twist. What had she stepped into? What kind of man could stop an entire auction with a single word? And why did his presence feel both terrifying and magnetic? Without another word, he gestured to the guards. They came forward silently, and in moments, Lyra was lifted from the platform, carried away from the hall, away from the eyes of those who had seen her as nothing more than a commodity. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but the voice of the masked man followed her like a shadow. "You will learn soon enough," he said, his tone unreadable. "Do not test me." The fortress corridors were dark and cold. Torches lined the walls, but they barely touched the shadows that seemed to curl and writhe at the edges of vision. Lyra's heart pounded with each step. Her thoughts raced. Who was he? Why had he claimed her? And why did she feel as though she were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, something that would change everything? Finally, they reached a chamber at the highest tower. The doors were heavy, iron-bound, and as they swung open, Lyra saw the room within. High ceilings, black stone walls, and windows that looked out over the frozen valley below. No furniture, save for a simple chair and a desk of dark wood. The room was empty, yet it felt alive, as though it waited, watching. The masked man gestured for her to stand. "Here, you will remain until I choose otherwise," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Do not try to escape. The forest will not hide you. The snow will not protect you. Only obedience can keep you alive." Lyra's eyes flared with defiance. "I do not belong to anyone," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and courage, "and I will not obey." The man tilted his head slightly as though amused. "We shall see." Then he turned and left, the sound of his boots echoing down the stone corridors, leaving Lyra alone with the fireless cold and the silence that pressed down on her chest. Hours passed, perhaps days. The chamber had no windows to measure time, and the torchlight flickered like the pulse of the world outside. Lyra wandered, testing the walls, examining the door, dreaming of escape. She thought of her family who had betrayed her, of her pack now powerless to save her, of the masked man whose eyes haunted her in memory even when he was absent. Then, as the sun finally set beyond the blackened peaks, a shadow fell across the floor. Lyra looked up and saw him standing in the doorway again, uncloaked this time. The mask was gone. His face was pale, sharp, and impossibly handsome, like a sculpture carved from ice. But there was something in his expression, something unreadable, that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. "You do not understand," he said softly, almost too softly. "I did not take you for gold. I took you because—" He paused, searching, his gaze intense, unreadable. "You are mine." Lyra stepped back, confusion, fear, and something else swirling inside her. "Mine," she repeated, voice barely a whisper. "I am not yours to take." His eyes softened just a fraction, and for a moment she thought she saw vulnerability behind the storm of his presence. "Perhaps not yet," he said, "but you will see. You will understand why this is necessary, and in time perhaps you will come to trust me." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Trust. She had known only betrayal, and yet she could not deny the strange, magnetic pull that the Alpha King held over her. Fear, anger, fascination, they twisted together into something she did not want, yet could not resist. The doors closed behind him with a final, echoing clang, leaving her alone once more in the towering chamber. She sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around herself, staring at the shadows that danced across the stone walls. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of ghosts. And inside, a fire stirred within her chest, a fire of defiance, a fire of fear, and a fire of curiosity she did not yet dare to name. Somewhere in the fortress, the Alpha King watched. And somewhere in the snow-filled world beyond, a storm of power and fate was gathering, one that would change everything if Lyra survived to see it. Her story, she realized, was no longer her own. And yet, she would not go quietly. Cliffhanger, as the first snow of evening settled outside her tower window, a soft, haunting voice whispered through the shadows. You cannot hide from me, Lyra. Not now. Not ever. The morning light fell pale through the narrow windows of the tower, casting long, silver shadows across the cold stone floor. Lyra sat on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, her hands still raw from the ropes that had bound her the night before. Sleep had been impossible, her mind alive with questions, fears, and the strange memory of the Alpha King's eyes sharp as winter ice, yet deep and unreadable. A soft knock echoed through the room. Lyra froze. Her heart raced. "Enter," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The door creaked open, and there he stood. Kale, the Alpha King, uncloaked, his gray eyes fixed on her like a hawk watching its prey. But today there was no anger, no harshness, only something else, something that made her stomach flutter and her mind hesitate. "You slept," he observed, his tone neutral. "Good. Sleep is a gift few can afford in this world." Lyra did not answer. Words felt small, fragile, useless. She had no desire to thank him, no desire to beg him, no desire to explain. She only wanted to understand why he had claimed her, and what he truly wanted from her. Kale studied her quietly, and Lyra felt as if he could see every thought, every fear, every hidden truth she kept even from herself. It was frightening, and yet in a strange, uneasy way comforting. "You will remain here until I decide otherwise," he said finally. "I will not harm you, not unless you force me to." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Then why have you taken me?" Kale's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Because the world is cruel," he said. "Because people like your family do not always make the right choices, because you are strong, and because you deserve protection." Lyra laughed bitterly. "Protection? From what? From you?" Kale's lips twitched, almost a smile. "From yourself, from them, from the darkness that surrounds this land. And yes, from me if you are foolish enough to tempt it." Lyra's heart tightened. Tempt it? What did that mean? She did not trust him, she could not. And yet, his presence made her feel as though her own courage, her own fire, was being tested in ways she did not understand. The days that followed were a careful dance of observation, defiance, and silent curiosity. Kale visited her each morning, sometimes speaking, sometimes merely watching as she moved about the tower. He did not force her into obedience. He did not command her. But every word, every glance carried the weight of authority and the subtle promise of protection. Lyra found herself drawn into his world, whether she wanted to be or not. She saw the soldiers who obeyed him without question, the wards that kept the spirits of the forest from crossing into his halls, the throne room where decisions of life and death were made with the same calm precision Kale had shown in claiming her. One afternoon, as the sun glinted through frost-covered windows, Kale spoke of the land outside. "The forest is alive," he said. "It remembers every wrong, every betrayal. Spirits linger, feeding on anger, on fear. Few can enter without paying a price." "You will learn this soon enough." Lyra's eyes widened. "And you, can you enter safely?" Kale's gaze darkened. "I am not safe. That is why I need strength beside me. That is why I need someone who understands courage." Lyra felt her pulse quicken. Courage. He called her courageous. And yet she could not forget the way he had claimed her, the way he could dominate a room without effort. She did not yet know whether to fear him or to trust him, or perhaps both. The castle was a world of rituals and shadows. Lyra watched as Kale met with other pack leaders, his words sharp, measured, unyielding. She listened as he spoke of alliances, of threats, of powers that stretched beyond mortal understanding. And all the while, she felt a strange pull toward him, not desire, not yet, but a fascination she could not name. One evening, as snow fell thick and fast, Kale led her to a balcony that overlooked the frozen valley. The wind bit at her cheeks, and the world below was a blur of white and shadow. "You see," Kale said, his voice low, almost intimate, "everything here is fragile. One wrong step, one wrong choice, and it all falls apart. And yet we continue, because we must." Lyra shivered. "I do not understand why I am here, why you claimed me." Kale's gaze softened. Perhaps because you will remind me of what I lost. Perhaps because you are the only one who can challenge me and survive. The words made her heart twist. Challenge him. She had not yet dared. But something in his eyes dared her, teased her, and she felt a strange thrill she could not name. Days turned into nights, and Lyra began to see the cracks beneath Kale's unyielding exterior. A flicker of doubt in his eyes, a tension in his jaw, a quiet sadness when he thought no one watched. She began to understand that he bore a weight she could not yet imagine, the weight of power, of responsibility, and perhaps of loneliness. One night, curiosity overtook caution. She followed him quietly through the corridors, her bare feet soundless against the stone. He moved to a hidden chamber, one she had never seen, and there she watched him kneel before a black mirror, whispering words in a language older than any she had known. The mirror shimmered, shadows twisting within it, and Kale's hands trembled slightly as he touched its surface. Her breath caught. What was this? Magic, a curse, a prayer. The Alpha King, whom the world feared, bowed before something that was not flesh. And yet he was magnificent, terrifying, human, and broken. Kale spoke, not knowing she was there. I cannot protect her, I cannot lose her. And yet, if I refuse the darkness, I may lose myself. Lyra's heart ached. She wanted to step forward, to speak, to offer comfort. But she stayed hidden, understanding at last that the man who had claimed her was as bound by chains as she was, chains forged from power, loneliness, and fear. The next day, Kale approached her with a new light in his eyes. You watched me last night, he said softly. Lyra's stomach twisted. I was curious. He studied her, not with anger, but with a strange intensity that made her breath catch. Curiosity can be dangerous in this place, but it can also be the start of understanding. Do you wish to understand me, Lyra? She hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, yet something deep in her soul whispered yes. Perhaps, she admitted. Kale nodded. Then you must see beyond fear, beyond anger, beyond what the world tells you. You must see me as I truly am. The day passed with lessons in observation and patience. Kale showed her the fortress, its hidden passages, its traps, and its defenses. He taught her to read the signs of the forest, the subtle shifts in shadow, the faint whispers of spirits, the scent of danger carried on the wind. Lyra found herself learning quickly, and with each lesson, the tension between them grew, a mixture of challenge and recognition. He respected her courage, her fire, even as he reminded her of the limits of her power. She challenged him in return, questioning, arguing, refusing to bow completely. And in the space between defiance and obedience, a strange bond began to form, fragile but undeniable. One night, as the first full moon of winter rose over the valley, Kale brought her to the highest tower. The wind howled like spirits in mourning, the snow dancing like silver sparks in the torchlight. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the moon's cold glow. You have courage, he said, and you have spirit, but do you have loyalty? Lyra's gaze met his. Loyalty is earned, not demanded, she said. Kale's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Good, perhaps you are stronger than I thought. The wind picked up and the snow swirled around them, as though the world itself was watching. Lyra felt a chill in her bones, but not from the cold. She felt the weight of power, the pull of fate, and the undeniable presence of the man who had claimed her. And then, as the wind whispered through the tower, she heard it, a faint, echoing howl, distant and haunting, carried on the night. She turned to Kale, fear and curiosity mingling. He did not speak at first. His eyes were distant, thoughtful. Then finally he said, the forest remembers, and it does not forget. Soon you will see the true danger of this world and the true price of survival. Lyra's heart pounded. Danger was coming, she knew, but she did not yet understand its shape. And Kale was both her protector and her enigma, a storm of shadow and ice she could not yet tame. As the moon rose high above the frozen land, Lyra understood one thing clearly. Her life had changed forever. and whether she survived or fell, she would not be the same again. Cliffhanger, that night, a faint shadow moved outside the tower. Lyra's heart froze as she realized the howl had come closer. Something was coming, something ancient, and the Alpha King, Kale, would have to face it. And so would she. The forest outside the fortress was alive with shadows, twisting shapes, and the faint murmur of spirits carried on the wind. Lyra had never seen a place so beautiful and terrifying at once. The trees were tall, skeletal, their bare branches clawing at the gray sky. Snow clung to their limbs, turning the forest into a glittering maze of silver and black. Every step she took seemed to echo in the stillness, every crunch of ice underfoot a warning that danger was near. Kale walked beside her, silent as a shadow, his eyes scanning the trees with the precision of a predator. His presence was heavy, commanding, and at the same time protective. Lyra felt it in every glance, every careful movement, every subtle word. He had claimed her, yes, but he did not bind her with chains. Instead, he allowed her space to move, to learn, to grow. "You must trust the forest," Kale said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, almost a whisper. "It will test you. It will trick you. Spirits are drawn to fear, to anger, to doubt. You cannot hide those things here." Lyra swallowed hard. "And if I fail," Kale's gray eyes met hers, "then it will take you, and it will teach you a lesson far harsher than fear." Her pulse quickened. The stories she had heard about the forest were terrifying. Travelers vanished, packs fell to strange curses, and even powerful alphas sometimes never returned. Yet, despite the fear curling in her chest, she felt a spark of determination. She would not be helpless. She would not be a prize to fate or fear. As they ventured deeper, the shadows grew heavier, and the air thickened with a strange energy. Lyra felt it pressing against her skin, curling around her thoughts, whispering doubts she tried to ignore. Kale moved with ease, his steps confident, his gaze unwavering. She realized that for all his power, he was not untouched by the forest's tricks. There was tension in his shoulders, a shadow in his eyes that hinted at worry he did not speak aloud. "Stay close," he said, "and do not trust what you hear." Hours passed. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of ice and shadow. Lyra stumbled once, catching herself on a tree, and Kale's hand shot out to steady her. Their fingers brushed, and a spark of heat passed between them. She pulled back quickly, embarrassed, but Kale's gaze softened just enough for her to notice. "You are stronger than I expected," he said quietly. Lyra's cheeks burned. "I am not trying to impress you." Kale tilted his head. "Perhaps not. But courage speaks even when pride tries to hide it." They walked in silence after that, each step heavy with unspoken words and thoughts. Lyra realized how much she depended on him, not just for protection, but for guidance, for understanding. And she also realized something more dangerous. She did not want to resist him entirely. There was something in his presence, in his quiet strength, that drew her, even when her mind screamed caution. The forest began to shift as evening fell. The shadows grew longer, deeper, and Lyra could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching, judging, waiting. The snow sparkled like tiny diamonds, but every sparkle seemed a trick, a lure, a whisper of danger. Suddenly, a howl ripped through the forest, closer than any they had heard before. Lyra froze, her heart hammering. Kale's eyes narrowed, and he drew a dagger from his belt, moving in front of her. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice firm but not harsh. "Do not panic. Only fear will guide them to us." Lyra nodded, her body trembling, yet her mind sharp. She had survived the fortress. She could survive this. She would survive this. From the shadows, a pack of twisted, spectral wolves emerged, their eyes glowing like embers, their forms flickering between flesh and shadow. They circled Kale and Lyra, silent and patient, waiting for a misstep. Kale moved with lethal grace, striking the nearest wolf with a swift, precise blow. Lyra watched, terrified yet fascinated, as he fought not just with strength but with skill and strategy. Every motion was calculated, every strike a lesson. She wanted to run, but she forced herself to stay, to watch, to learn. "You must understand," Kale said between movements. "Strength alone will not save you here. You must know your enemy, anticipate it, and remain calm. Fear is the greatest weapon the forest gives them." Lyra nodded, clutching a stick she had found. She was not ready to fight as he could, but she would do what she could. When a spectral wolf lunged at her, she struck at it instinctively, and to her surprise it recoiled, its form flickering. The pack hesitated, and Kale's eyes met hers. "Good," he said softly. "Courage, yes, and now focus." They fought together, moving as one in the snow-strewn forest. Lyra's heart raced, not from fear alone, but from the strange, dangerous exhilaration of standing beside him. Every glance, every touch, every shared movement created a bond stronger than words could express. Finally, as the pack of spirits retreated, howling into the night, Kale lowered his dagger and turned to her. His breath was visible in the cold air, and his gray eyes were darker, softer, filled with something she could not name. "You did well," he said. "Far better than I expected." Lyra shook, not from the cold, but from the intensity of the moment. I just wanted to survive," she admitted. Kale's gaze softened even further. "And that is why you will survive more than most. Courage is not about absence of fear, Lyra. It is about standing even when fear is stronger than your body, your mind, your heart." They began to walk back toward the fortress, silence stretching between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lyra felt her chest tighten with an emotion she could not yet define: admiration, respect, fascination, perhaps even the faintest flicker of something deeper. As they reached a clearing, Kale suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed, scanning the trees. Then, without warning, he staggered, his hand clutching his side. Lyra gasped and ran to him. "Kale, what happened?" A shadow of pain crossed his face, something raw, something human. "A trap," he said, gritting his teeth. "I miscalculated. Do not panic." But panic had already risen in Lyra's chest. She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the flow of blood. His strength was fading, his usual calm giving way to a flicker of vulnerability she had not seen before. "You must hold on," she said, her voice firm, trembling with fear. "I will not let anything happen to you. You cannot leave me here." Kale's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, and his hand rested over hers. "You are not like the others," he said, voice weak. "You care. That frightens me more than anything else." Lyra's heart ached. She wanted to scream, to fight, to protect him, to keep him alive at any cost. And for the first time, she understood the depth of her feelings, not just fear, not just admiration, but a fierce, aching need to be near him, to stand with him, to face the world together. With great effort, they made their way to the fortress. Lyra supported him as best she could, her hands burning where they pressed against his side. Every step was agony, but she refused to let him fall. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows pressing against them, but she would not yield. Inside the fortress, Kale's guards rushed to them, tending to his wound with practiced skill. Lyra stepped back, watching as he was lifted onto a table, as the color drained from his face, and as the life in his eyes flickered uncertainly. She realized then the truth she had been avoiding. Kale, the Alpha King, the man who seemed unbreakable, was human. And he needed her, not as a subject, not as a prize, but as someone who could see him, who could stand beside him, who could care. Hours passed. Kale lay unconscious, the weight of his power and his humanity pressed upon him. Lyra stayed by his side, her hands clasped together, her mind racing. She had survived betrayal, she had faced the forest, she had seen his vulnerability, and she had felt something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. As dawn broke, casting pale light over the frozen fortress, Kale's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, gray and sharp as ever, but softened by pain and trust. "You stayed," he whispered. "I did," Lyra said simply, "and I will stay. You are not alone anymore." For the first time, Kale's armor, both literal and of the heart, seemed to crack. And Lyra realized that in saving him, In facing the forest and the shadows together, they had begun a bond that neither power nor fear could break. Cliffhanger outside the fortress, a howl echoed across the snow. Kale's eyes darkened. "The forest does not forget," he said. "And whatever waits for us is coming for both of us." The fortress lay silent under a heavy blanket of snow, the wind carrying whispers of the forest's long memory. Inside, Kale sat on the edge of the highest tower, gray eyes fixed on the horizon where shadows moved among the trees. Lyra stood beside him, wrapped in a thick cloak, her hands buried in the folds of her sleeves. The snow swirled around them like silver smoke, yet beneath the beauty, a tension hummed, a warning that the forest's ancient wrath was stirring once more. Kale's voice broke the quiet. "The spirits are restless. Whatever waits in the forest knows of us now. It will not leave without taking what it desires." Lyra's heart tightened. She remembered the last attack, the twisted wolves, the way Kale had bled in her arms, the fear that had burned in her chest like fire. She had survived because she had trusted him, and now she knew that their survival would depend on more than courage alone. "What can we do?" she asked. Her voice was steady, even if her hands trembled slightly. Kale's gaze softened as he looked at her. "We face it together," he said. "As equals, we have learned much about fear, about courage, about each other. That is our strength, but it will not be enough if we hesitate." Lyra nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The forest did not forgive weakness, and neither would fate. She had been sold, betrayed, and tested beyond her limits. Now she stood beside the Alpha King, not as a prize, not as a pawn, but as a partner, a comrade, a force to be reckoned with. They descended into the courtyard together. The snow was deeper here, pressed into the ground like ice that would not melt. Kale's guards gathered silently, their faces grim, their weapons ready. Lyra noticed the tension in each of them, respect for Kale, yes, but also fear for what they were about to face. She felt it too, yet it was mingled with something else: determination, a spark of daring, and the unspoken bond forming between her and Kale. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low yet full of command. "Do not falter, trust your instincts and trust me." Lyra followed without hesitation. She did not need the words repeated. She had seen his strength, his wisdom, his vulnerability. She had felt the bond that had begun in shadows, had grown in danger, and had become something neither fear nor darkness could destroy. They moved into the forest, the snow muffling their steps. The trees loomed tall and silent, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like ancient hands. Shadows clung to every hollow, every curve of the terrain. Lyra felt the energy in the forest, the restless spirits, the whispering of unseen eyes. It was alive, and it knew they were coming. Suddenly the snow around them shifted. Shadows coalesced into forms, dark shapes with eyes like fire, faces hidden in mist. Lyra's heart raced, but she did not move back. She looked at Kale, who stood tall, a pillar of strength and calm amid the storm of shadows. "They are testing us," he said, voice low but steady. "Do not strike first. Wait for the moment they show their true form." Lyra's hands curled into fists. She had learned to trust her instincts, to face fear without letting it control her. And now she had someone beside her who would not falter, who would protect her without overshadowing her strength. The shadows surged forward suddenly, revealing their true forms: twisted spirits, wolf-like and spectral, circling them with teeth bared and claws ready. Kale moved with a speed and precision that made Lyra's breath catch. He struck the nearest spirit with a swift motion, sending it scattering into the air like smoke. Lyra followed instinctively, using the lessons he had taught her. She struck with confidence, with focus, and found that her strikes had power, her courage had weight. The battle raged, a storm of shadow and snow. Lyra moved with Kale, their motions in sync, their unspoken bond guiding them. Each time a spirit lunged at her, Kale was there, and each time Kale faced a blow, Lyra was ready. Fear burned in her chest, but so did something else. exhilaration, trust, and a strange, deepening connection. Hours seemed to pass, though time had no meaning in the chaos. Slowly the spirits began to retreat, their forms dissolving into mist as the first light of dawn broke over the forest. Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps, her body aching, but her heart swelled with pride. They had survived together. Cale turned to her, eyes soft, almost vulnerable. "You have done well," he said, "far better than I could have imagined." Lyra shook her head. "We did it together," she said. "Not just me, not just you." Cale's gaze held hers, intense and unreadable. "Yes," he admitted. "Together, that is the only way either of us will survive what comes next." As the sun rose higher, casting silver light over the snow, Lyra realized something profound. She had entered this world as a captive, betrayed and afraid. But now she stood not only as a survivor, but as a partner, a force equal to the Alpha King himself. And she felt for the first time that she had a place, a purpose, and a choice. They returned to the fortress, the forest quiet behind them. The battle had left a mark on both of them, exhaustion, bruises, and a deep understanding of each other's strength and vulnerability. Cale moved with his usual grace, yet Lyra could see the faintest shadow of pain in his movements. "You should rest," she said softly. "You need to recover fully." Cale shook his head. "No, I need to ensure the fortress is secure, the wards hold, and the spirits do not return, but you may rest." Lyra smiled faintly. "I will not leave your side, not now, not ever." Cale's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked almost human, just a man, not a king, not a shadow, not a force of nature. "You have changed everything," he said. "Even me." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet fire that had nothing to do with the cold around them. She had not expected this. She had expected fear, obedience, and survival. Instead, she had found trust, partnership, and a connection that was as strong as the frozen land beneath their feet. Days passed. The fortress recovered from the storm of shadows, and the forest's restless whispers faded into cautious silence. Cale and Lyra moved among the soldiers, the wards, the corridors, teaching, learning, and preparing for whatever the forest might send next. Their bond grew stronger, built on shared trials, mutual respect, and an unspoken promise that neither would stand alone again. One evening, as the full moon rose over the valley, Lyra found herself standing beside Cale on the highest tower. The snow sparkled like diamonds, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and frost. "You have changed," Cale said softly. "You are stronger than when you arrived, braver, wiser, and you are not afraid of me." Lyra shook her head. "I am still afraid," she admitted. "But not of you, not anymore." Cale's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good, fear is a teacher, but trust is a choice, and you have chosen it." Lyra felt her heart tighten. She had not expected to feel this way. She had not expected to care, to trust, to rely on him so completely. And yet she did. And she knew, deep in her soul, that he felt the same. The wind howled through the tower, carrying with it the echoes of the forest. Somewhere in the distance, a lone howl answered the night, a reminder that the world was still wild, still dangerous, still alive. Cale turned to her, gray eyes soft but alert. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together, as equals. Not captor and captive, not king and subject, but as two who have survived the shadows and found strength in each other." Lyra nodded. "Together," she said, her voice firm, her heart steady. And in that moment, under the silver moon and the quiet snow, they both understood something eternal. The forest could test them, the spirits could challenge them, the world could betray them, and danger could always lurk nearby. But they had each other, and in that bond they had found not only survival, but redemption. As the first light of dawn touched the fortress, Lyra and Cale stood side by side, looking out over the frozen valley. The snow glimmered, the trees swayed gently, and the wind carried a promise of life, hope, and the possibility of a future they would shape together.